In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to float 3 columns across a page and make them fill the page from side to side, not leave any gaps, and also to have unfloated text below the 3 paragraphs. This can be a little tricky, and it also demonstrates to you how to clear floats. So what our page looks like now is we've got 3 animals, and each of them is going to become a column. Below that, a wide paragraph that's going to stay wide, and a little permission line at the bottom that is its own paragraph. In the CSS, I haven't specified anything for any paragraphs yet. So you see you have no P, and you have no classes for any P in the CSS as it is so far. So let's look at the HTML. And in the HTML, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the same class to each of the 3 animal paragraphs, because as columns that float, they're all going to be treated the same way. And after that, I will give a different class to the wide paragraph so I can make it behave differently from the 3 floated columns. So here's a class for a column. And I'll be simple, and I'll just name that class column. And then I will copy and paste carefully, including the quotation mark, and paste carefully inside the P tag for each of those 3 paragraphs. And then the wide paragraph, I'm going to give it a class cleverly named wide. Okay, quotation mark. And the final short paragraph, I don't have to give any special class to because it's just going to behave like a regular paragraph. So let's see, save that. And if we reload, we'll see there's no difference at all because I haven't styled those classes yet. I added the classes to the HTML. I have not yet styled them. So let's go into our CSS and do that. So I am going to have class P column, right? I named it column. And I'm going to have another class P wide. Remember, a dot before the name indicates that it's a class and not an ID. All right, I'm going to have that. And let's see, for my column, I'm going to start by adding this background color that I saved earlier. So I'll save it just with the background color, and I will reload. And so you see that the paragraphs that will become columns have their own background color. And they're a little bit squashed. We don't have padding yet, but let's add the floats and see what happens first of all with floats. So on those columns, let's add a float left. And whenever you float something that's a block, you have to make sure it has a width. So in this case, instead of using pixels, I'm going to use % because we've got 3 columns. We want them to go all the way across the screen. So let's divide 100 by 3 and use 33%. Save and reload. And there's no spaces in between them. We see that our 3 paragraphs have moved up against each other, giraffe to the left of elephant, lion to the left of giraffe. You also notice there's a little bit of a gap between the end of the 3 floated columns and the end of the heading, which has a background color. And that's because 33% times 3 adds up to 99. Not 100. We're not going to worry about that now, though, because we will be adding some margins. So you see a separation between the elephant and the giraffe, between the giraffe and the lion. We'll do that by adding margin. But before that, I want to add some padding because you see how the images are smack up against the edge of the container. So we want to add some padding. And we're going to see one of the big problems with floats and with columns as soon as we do. So we'll go into the CSS, and we will only add one thing. We will add padding, 20 pixels all around. That should add a nice buffer. We'll save, and we'll reload. And this is one of the biggest problems people run into when they are trying to use floats, when they're trying to lay out a page in any way, as soon as you add padding, you lose your 3 columns that used to go 1, 2, 3 across the page. The third one has fallen down. In addition, our wide paragraph has moved up to fill the space. That is a characteristic of floats, and that's why you need to clear your floats. So we're going to do that first to fix the wide paragraph, and then come back and deal with the other issues. So our wide paragraph, p.wide, the class of wide, what we need to do is we need to clear the floats. Now we could simply say clear left. That is a legitimate thing to do, but I'm going to save us some time by saying clear both, which usually works best of all. So I almost never just clear left or clear right. I usually clear both. It handles all the problems you might have. And by having this class on the paragraph that comes after the floats, you take care of that paragraph and you make it not float. That's what clear both is doing. So save and reload, and now our wide paragraph behaves perfectly. We didn't have to do anything to our attribution paragraph at the end because everything was taken care of when the wide paragraph had floats cleared. Our next problem to deal with, though, is the fact that our 33% now is too wide for our page. What can we do about that? Well, you remember box sizing. We talked about that in the previous video, and here's one of the reasons you really need to do it. The columns are becoming wider because we added padding. The 20 pixels of the padding is getting added to the 33%, and that's going to mess everything up for us. So what we need to do is get our box sizing, which I happen to have on a scratch pad over here so I can copy and paste it. As you recall, we have to do it 3 different ways to account for all the browsers. And I'm going to add that into my P column at the top and save. And before I reload, keep in mind that it is adding padding that made our third column, the lion, fall down below the others because the padding was added in addition to the 33%, even though that's not logical. Our box sizing fixes that, like this. We still don't have margins, okay, but we've got our 3 columns, 33% each, back where they need to be. So we fixed our columns and our padding, and we fixed them so well that even if we resize the browser window, these columns are going to readjust to be 33% wide, each column, no matter how narrow the window gets. So this is a pretty good solution, but as soon as we add margins, we're going to see we have another issue to solve. So let's do that, because we need to have margins to separate our columns. We want a space in between every pair of columns. So let's add margin, and we'll add just a modest amount of margin on, let's say, on the right side. Let's say 10 pixels, right? Doesn't seem like very much. And this will be added to the right side only of every single one of our columns. That is every P that has the class column. So save and reload. And again, we have the falling down problem. Now, I expected that, and there's a way to fix it. But you need to know that this is going to happen. You need to know how to fix it. So how can we put margins in between our columns and make them work perfectly? There is a way. And the solution is to use percentages, right? We've got percentage width, 33%. So what if we say margin right, 1%? Save, reload. Still a problem. And why is that? Well, think about it, right? We have 33 times 3, that equals 99, plus 1% times 3, 99 plus 3, 102. There is no 102%. So how can we get this down? What if we move it down to 32? 32 times 3 is 96. Perhaps our margin right will work now. 96 plus 3, 99. Yep. That's okay, but do you see the issue? The issue is that we've got a little ugly gap on the right-hand side, and that is because we're putting a margin on the right of every single column. The solution to this, so as not to drag it out, is to actually make a new class. This works perfectly for a 3-column layout. Make a new class called middle, and on that class we will grab our margin, and we will also add a margin left. Can you think about how this is going to work? And we actually don't need to be as small as 1%. All right, take the margin off of all the columns. So think about how this is going to work. If I have a class on my middle column only, middle out of 3, and that one column has a margin on the right and a margin on the left, the other 2 columns have no margin at all. Can I make this add up to 100? This right here is going to add up to 4, right? One column has one right margin of 2 and one left margin of 2. That's a total of 4. My 3 columns all have a width of 32%, so that adds up to 96. 96 plus 4, perfect 100. All right, the last question is, though, how am I going to apply this middle class, this new class that I made? Where am I going to put it? Why don't I put these on P column? Because then they would be on all the columns. Do I have to copy all these things and put them into middle? No, there's a trick that beginners often don't realize. I'm going to save this and go to my HTML, and that is you can have more than one class on an element in your HTML. So what I've just done to my giraffe column only is I have given it the middle class, keeping the column class. The other 2 columns only have column class, so they have no margins. This is a pretty neat way to make your columns work. Save, reload everything, and now notice the unsightly gap on the right-hand side, totally gone, and these columns will not break no matter what we do to them. Okay, they'll get a little wider because of the padding, right? But they are pretty bulletproof columns. A pretty neat thing. So one last thing. Normally your columns would have a lot of text in them. Normally they would be a div instead of a P, and they would contain P's inside, maybe headings. But let's create some columns filled up with text. We'll do that by adding 3 new paragraphs to our HTML. And I've got these in my little scratch pad, so the same as the 3 that have animals in, but right now these are empty. Copy these, put them into the HTML after the animals. All right, so stick them in here. And then I'm going to grab some lorem ipsum text and put the same text inside each of those paragraphs. So between the P tags, there's my first column, second column, third column. They all have exactly the same text in them. Save and reload so that you can see that even with text inside, these columns are very flexible, right? They're going to stay nice and contained no matter how wide or narrow your browser window gets. So columns, floats, don't forget clear floats, don't forget box sizing, don't forget percents.